Hello and welcome to Alien Places, the show where I ask my guests which three places they would show an alien visiting Earth to give it a sense of the key issues facing human society. And today I'm joined by Lucy Lapwing. So hi Lucy.
Hello, thank you for having me.
That's okay. And so can you tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, okay, so I'm Lucy. I am a self-described nature nerd. In my working life, I work in conservation, but in my spare time, I spend all of it outside, engaging with nature, watching wildlife, learning about it, and writing about it. So I am a wildlife communicator, if that exists. And I just want to help connect more people with nature, tell them about it. I enjoy translating really kind of complex wildlife processes and sciencey things into human language and telling them about it. So that's me.
Basically. Yeah, brilliant. Well, I've seen your Instagram stories, and there's some really interesting regular features on there. So I really like the bird song of the day, and you've also got Funky Friday. And there's something I wanted to ask you about, which is the leaf miners, because it's really tiny creatures that not many people kind of notice and talk about. So can you tell us a little bit about the leaf miners?
Yeah, so fascination with leaf miners for me comes quite far down the wormhole of delving into nature. I've always been interested in wildlife, and I'm sure a lot of people relate in that the sexy stuff is the obvious stuff. So an interest in, big things like whales and dolphins and elephants and lions. But as I've gone more and more into learning about wildlife, it's those tiny, minute little processes that are happening right under our noses that we never take the time to stop and watch are the ones that fascinate me the most. And leaf miners is a perfect example of that. So leaf mines are these little patterns that you can find in leaves that are created by a minute caterpillar, often of a moth, but you get them of different species. We'll leave that over there. Often of a moth, a tiny caterpillar that is so small it lives in between the layers of a leaf, and it spends its entire caterpillar world in there just scoffing away at the inside of a leaf and creates this little zigzag pattern, all different types for all different species, until it's ready to emerge as an adult moth. So you can find evidence of this little world going on if you look at plants like, well, pretty much most plants and trees in the UK will have an associated leaf miner species, which is why I find it fascinating, because there's all these tiny miniature niches that have evolved. And so like the size and the leaf and the pattern can tell you what kind of moth it is that's going to emerge from it. So if you just take time to have a look, it's fascinating. It's geeky as hell, but it's really, really interesting.
Well, I think the alien, we don't think it's geeky at all. We think there's nothing wrong with talking about the detail and the smaller creatures. So we like that over here. So we saw you on Countryfile a few days ago, and that was great.
Yes.
But they only gave you a couple of minutes, and I don't think it gave justice to the wealth of information that is Lucy Lapwing. I'm particularly interested in what you're saying about the health benefits of connecting with nature.
Yes, so I have a very personal experience with the health benefits of the natural world. I've always been a wildlife fan, but it wasn't until the end of my first job in conservation when I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I had to take 6 months off work just to have chemotherapy and treatment. So I had a very depleted immune system. I was in hospital every other week. What should have been quite a negative time in my life turned into a really positive one, because I spent all that free time that I had when I should have been working just outside teaching myself about wildlife. So exploring every nature reserve within my reach. And the process would just basically be go for a walk and just see what I can find of anything, whether it's a flower or a tree or bees or ants or, something under some rotten bark or a fungus growing up, or what's that bird singing, and just documenting it, reading up about it, teaching myself and banking that knowledge and growing it. And just that distraction and that focus and complete grounding, and seeing that no matter what's going on in my life, there's just really cool stuff happening in nature all the time. And it doesn't care that I'm ill. It doesn't care that anybody has any problems. It just carries on. And you can just take yourself away from it and watch it. It's brilliant. So
it's great, isn't it? I mean, there's lots of science behind this as well. I mean, this is not a new idea. This has been well documented since, at least the 1990s, if not before. So it's great to have people talking about that, because this isn't kind of this isn't just one or two people's opinions. This is really well documented. Lowering blood pressure and lowering heart rate and that kind of thing. So really important physically, and that's something that I like to talk about as well. That even if you don't care about nature and you don't care about the environment or biodiversity or global warming, things like that, you still care about your own health, and so therefore it's still important to connect with nature and conserve nature purely for self-reasons and nothing else.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, even if you think you hate nature, You don't. If you go outside and you're in a green environment, those health benefits can be measured. So even if you don't understand what you're looking at, it still benefits you being in that natural environment. You know, everybody knows that going for a walk makes you feel better. And like one of my favourite quotes is it Henry David Thoreau? Thoreau? Don't know how to say his name. I went for a walk in the woods and came out taller than the trees. It's one of my favourite quotes about nature, because it's just right. Like if you spend time outside, you feel better. And I found that is amplified tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold when you start to understand what you're looking at. It's not just a walk outside, it's a walk to look at things. So.
Yeah, you definitely get a lot more out of it when you know and can interpret what you're looking at. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
we're having this conversation during coronavirus lockdown, and I was starting to wonder, the more and more that the birds start taking over the city centres when there's few humans about, at what point am I going to get pooed on by a bird? It's just, you know, crossing my path as I go to the shop.
It's happened to me a lot, and it's not that bad.
Yeah, well, I just like clockwork. Last time I came back from the shops, got home, found some bird poo on the Tesco bag there, and but I think that's, you know, it's an interesting dynamic that's going on at the moment, isn't it? The recolonisation of our city centres by wildlife.
Yeah, it doesn't take long for it to start moving back in.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about your 3 alien places then. So you've had to think about the 3 places that you would show our alien friend here visiting from another planet.
Yes. And hello, alien.
First place. Yes. Hello, Lucy. It's saying. So what would be the first place that you would take your alien visitor?
So the 3 places I've chosen, and each of them are not necessarily a named place. I'm not naming and shaming. They're not geographical places. It's more of a type of place. So the first place that I pick is just a generic bit of British natural scrubby habitat, bit of woodland, bit of meadow, perhaps even a little pond in there, in a typical sunny day, perhaps in mid-May. And I'd like to take the alien down there and just show what, if you just sit in a spot in a natural space for 2 hours, 3 hours, not moving much, just watching just how much you can encounter and just what you can see. And the absolute humming and buzzing of life, all this stuff that's happening on so many different levels. When you sit down there at first, you'll start to see the obvious stuff. So you might see any, you know, larger mammals moving about, if there's some grazing animals like deer or anything like that. This is a hypothetical situation in where we've got all of our large mammals as well, by the way. So we're not as depleted as we are now. So there might be things like boar and maybe not getting as extreme as bears, but
is this potentially an area of the UK several hundred years ago, for example?
Yes, yeah, it could be, or an area with future rewilding opportunities. The dreaded rewilding word. But just a place that's got all these large macro species interacting, so you'd start seeing your bird life. There'd be lots of audible clues of that. You might hear, getting a bit late for cuckoo, but you might hear the tail end of cuckoo. You might hear swifts flying over high, screaming. You'll hear the purring of a turtle dove in a hedge. There'll be loads of scratchy warblers about. You'll hear whitethroat, you'll hear blackcap. And then just birds now that we take for granted. So things like cuckoos, turtle doves, nightingales, which wouldn't be singing until, maybe if we stuck around till night time, we'd hear that. But all these birds that we don't.
We communicate telepathically. It's asking me about bats and moths as well. We see.
Yeah, if we do let's do 24 hours in the meadow. So in the daytime we have all of these birds moving about. At night you'd perhaps see something like owls, so you wouldn't hear them unless they were screeching or hooting, because they fly so silently. But barn owls would be swooping out across the open grass. Perhaps in the wooded area you might get tawnies. And then as you sit there for longer, it's the little things that start to emerge. So you might notice a wildflower perched next to you. When you look up close, there's butterfly eggs just laid along it, and you get down at eye level in the grass and you can just see a whole mini safari in there. You can see predators and prey hunting each other. You can see gangs of creatures all together, mini beasts, and all these interactions that you'd see on a larger level that you also see replicated on the miniature. And just this endless diversity. And you can see it all changing.
To be thinking about the scale of animal that humans tend to be more interested in. So,
yes.
like say, humans gravitate towards the larger animals because they're similar size to us and they're a bit more obvious and easy to see. But actually, like once you get down into the undergrowth, there's a whole communities, whole ecosystems playing out their life cycles in interesting, if not more interesting ways than the larger animals.
Yeah, fascinating. You know, replicating that behavior we see in the large mammals that we love so much, but just other behavior that's just out of this world that we'd never possibly imagine. Like, I'm a really big fan of dragonflies. I love the whole Odonata gang, so dragonflies and damselflies, and you know, they live the majority of their life under the surface of a pond, so not even as that beautiful creature that we see flying around. Some of them can live underwater for 7 years as a larvae before emerging as an adult, just to spend one season on the wing.
Well, the mayfly is an example of that as well, where it spends most of its life as a sort of a grub underground, and then spends sort of 24, 48 hours of its life flying around afterwards. And
yeah, things have a really short.
But actually, it's 2 or 3 years old by that point.
Yeah, exactly. And just all sorts. I mean, things like jumping spiders. We think spiders all build webs, but jumping spiders don't. They hunt by crawling around with these gorgeous big eyes. And they hunt like a cat, so they'll sneak up on something and prowl and pounce and get it. Yeah, there's just endless stuff to see. And you can, that's the wonderful thing about nature, is there's so much of it, so much diversity, that you can never know it all, and you can never see it all, and you can never learn it all. So
yeah, well, we've recorded about sort of 8.5, 9 million species on the planet so far, but the estimates are, a trillion plus species, especially if you include microorganisms. Then
this is the thing. Yeah, I mean, that estimate changes all the time of how many we've actually got, and there might be only 3,000 recorded species of millipede in the world, but they estimate that there's 12, and yeah, it just happens all the time. So I mean, the realistic chances, if the alien and I sat in the meadow for long enough, we could identify species new to science. So
well, the alien's got excellent eyesight, so it might be a good companion for species ID to identify.
Yeah, perfect.
So what about a song that you would play the alien in this place? Are there any particular songs that you'd like to play the alien?
So I've cheated a little bit with this one. It's not necessarily a track from a band. First of all, I just generically play birdsong because of how complex and wonderful it is, and I'm a big fan of that being a completely different dimension in which to observe the natural environment. And yeah, so I mean, any one of those characters that I picked out before could be that individual voice, but the RSPB actually had a song in the charts last year. It's the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, and they had a track of 100% pure bird song that got to number 18 in the charts in the UK. So that would be a perfect backdrop that just summarises all of those species, both common and now rare in the UK, and all those different variety of voices that we hear coming out of bird life. So.
Well, I like the idea of actually playing the alien a song, but it doesn't have to be a song in terms of you pressing a button on your iPad and playing it from a band, but actually you're playing the various songs to the alien anyway, yes, by virtue of being out in nature and hearing all the different bird songs and pointing out that that's a wren and that's a chaffinch. And,
yeah, I mean, the reason we as humans have song is because we communicate using sound, and sound's a really useful tool, and it's developed beyond just us talking into us getting pleasure out of it and listening to music. But the entire natural world also uses sound to communicate in different ways, and that's exactly what birdsong is. It's amazing. So music's not just restricted to us.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the reasons that I've introduced playing songs for the alien from the podcast and the conversations about alien places is that songs and films can communicate feelings and emotions in a different way to just talking to the alien as well. So it's a different form of communication that is sometimes impossible through words alone.
Definitely, yeah. And when you get more into identifying birds by song, it has that emotional connection. Like, I regularly dream about swifts and just hearing swifts like all year. I've got a proper mental fixation with them. And, if I've been in the field and I've been listening to willow warblers for long enough, I get them stuck in my head. So I'll be going to sleep at night and I can hear it going round in my head like you can an annoying tune. So yeah, it has the exact same effect as human song. It's great.
And what about film? Would you play a film to the alien in this area of the British countryside?
Now, which film would I pick for this? Probably the film Into the Wild for this one. And this is about, as a human, completely disconnecting from society, rejecting all of the expectations of what you should do, who you should be, and what you should achieve, and all the stuff you should have, and just going out and just seeing if you can live off the natural world, if you can become so in tune with it that you understand it and you know how to survive off it. I think would be a good one. Completely engrossing yourself in a natural ecosystem, like this imaginary little patch of scrub that would have existed. But no.
Well, the alien's very good at kind of survival skills and being able to sustain itself in any environment. So interesting to show the alien in that film, to see how humans doesn't necessarily come naturally to humans anymore. We've disconnected.
No. It mightn't be a happy ending, but I'll let the alien watch it.
Great. Okay, so what about the second place that you would show an alien visiting Earth?
So the second place involves a little bit of time travel then from our lovely little meadow of a few hundred, maybe more than a few hundred years ago, to the modern day. And it's naming no names and shaming no people, but it is to an average British garden, manicured lawn, flower beds, just the entire summary of British obsession with gardening, and this weird false miniature ecosystem that we created and that we revere and absolutely worship and think's the epitome of beauty. And just how weird I find that. I feel like I'm the alien here.
Yeah. Well, it's very culturally specific, isn't it? You're referring to these very neatly mown lawns, is that right?
There's multiple issues we could go into, but there's people's fixations with lawns. First of all, what even is a lawn? Why is that attractive? Weeding. What is a weed? How dare you try and define what is a good plant and what's a bad one, and try and remove some of them that, some of these weeds have completely unique relationships with invertebrates, and that invertebrate relies only on that weed, and you're saying, I don't like you, I want you out. The fixation with species from other countries, just that the native British flora and the wildlife and the wild plants that we have here isn't pretty enough, and we have to bring stuff in that shouldn't be here, and then inevitably that escapes into the countryside and causes havoc.
That raises the issue of invasive species generally and globally, doesn't it? Because
of all sorts.
The habitat loss, invasive species is the second most prevalent reason for the loss of biodiversity. So invasive species is a huge issue, and I should point out that the alien here has been thoroughly decontaminated on its journey to Earth, so there's no concern of invasive species.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like, not in my backyard and anti, global, but it's just how people will fixate over the beauty of a plant. I don't understand why somebody would want to have in their garden a plant that has no value to wildlife. Why do you just want the plant to exist on its own without any interaction with the other species? Because for me, when I look at any organism, whether it's a plant or an invertebrate or a bird or a fungus, it's not just that species on its own. It's what that means, and it's how that interacts with everything else in that ecosystem and what is related to it. So if I see a certain type of plant, I'll think, oh, I'll keep an eye out for this caterpillar because I know it's its food plant. Or if I see a certain type of fungus, I'll be like, oh, does this have a symbiotic relationship with that tree? And then I'll look for that tree. And it's all about those interactions and those relationships. But people seem to just want to worship the plant on its own, not in relationship. They don't want to attract any wildlife with it, which just is alien to me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, something that the alien said to me during our world tour when we were in Australia, as one of the 10 places that we've just come back from our travels. It was explaining to me a concept that the complexity is beautiful, and it gave me the example of a spider's web. And you imagine the complexity of the spider's web, and then you imagine a more simple spider's web with just sort of one ring of web, and actually that would be less beautiful. And it's the complexity that makes it beautiful, and it's the functionality that makes it beautiful as well. I think there's a phrase, functional is beautiful, because that complexity is not just for the sake of it and not for the visual aesthetic, but also for the function of actually catching the flies so that the spider can eat them.
I mean, I totally get the whole gardening thing, and I get the whole making a space look beautiful, and I'm not wanting to bash or criticize anybody that does get a lot of pleasure out of it, but I just find that it's progressed and the culture's progressed to a point that just doesn't make sense anymore. The fact that large numbers of people now, I mean, how things like, I won't name the brand name, but how things like weed killer can just be advertised on telly that's a plant poison. You can just drown your garden in it, and there's no thought about what if that runs off and affects pond life, or people can just coat the pavements in ant killer and not have to worry about it. People can block up nest holes of birds because they make too much mess, and people just want to push nature out and have this manicured perfect vision, and that's not what the world is that we live in. And there's just so much more joy to just letting it all come in. And why not have like a honeysuckle or hawthorn or blackthorn coated in bees, and you know, a mixed like bushy grassy meadow bit with loads of different flowers in that's just buzzing with crickets and beetles and butterflies all over it, instead of just neat shiny grass that has nothing in it.
It's a strange alien landscape, isn't it, for the alien, especially compared to the first place that you've shown it.
Yeah.
You're now showing it a second place, which has got much lower biodiversity, much simpler wildlife, and less interesting for a lot of people. And it's interesting also reflecting on the cultural trends of this, because I think nowadays there is more awareness of having wildlife in your garden, and there's lots of kind of information on TV and online about how to rewild your garden to some extent.
Yeah.
If that's or
I hope the tide's changing.
Yeah, so it's good that it's changing, but it's important for the alien to understand the starting point that we have, and the depleted landscapes and back gardens that we have. So what about a song or a film that you would show the alien or play the alien in a manicured back lawn?
So the song for this one, which is so cheesy, but it's great, it's a conservation anthem, would be Colours of the Wind from Pocahontas. Okay. And the song just goes into singing about like kind of who are you as a human, how dare you think that. One of the lines is, you think you own whatever land you land on, and the earth is just a dead thing you can claim. Cheesy, I told you it's cheesy, but it's just that attitude of, this is my space, nature out.
That doesn't it make you angry? That the anthropocentrism makes this alien so angry. When we were traveling around the world, anything I said that was remotely anthropocentric, it just had a massive go at me. You know, I had a look at some clouds in the sky, and I said, "Oh, doesn't that cloud look like a smiley face?" And he just had a massive go at me, like, "Why are you thinking from your own perspective?" You know, and all that. And so it was a bit of a running thing for my world tour that, you know. So yeah, like you say, a song that expresses anthropocentrism in general, and you know, reminds us that it's a negative thing. It's very important, because humans are terrible at thinking constantly from their own point of view. And actually, that's why I've got the alien here in the first place, you know, to actually take us out of that anthropocentrism, take us out of that idea that we can think of the Earth from our point of view, because you know, we don't own this planet, and you know, maybe the termites are thinking it's their planet, and maybe 1.7 billion species we've discovered so far completely think it's their planet, and a lot of species,
it is to them.
Deep sea animals never heard of humans, so. Yeah, so a great fun song to attack anthropocentrism. Great. Yes. And what about a film? Would you show an alien a film in this manicured back lawn?
So what film have I done already? I've already done Into the Wild. Probably for this one, Captain Fantastic.
Okay, all right.
Which sounds like a film that like an 8-year-old kid would be into, but it's an excellent film, and I've only watched it relatively recently for the first time, about a man who has 5 kids, I think. There's loads of them in the film. And he basically, in current day America, just lives kind of off the grid with his kids in this really alternative lifestyle. It's a bit hippie. They're all quite political. There's all sorts of political leanings in there, but it's more about just an alternative way of being educated, feeding yourself, looking after yourself, and how you operate in society. And the story basically goes into an incident that happens. I don't want to spoil it, but it's just all about how people on the outside world in normal society perceive him. And even though we're all sitting there as members of that normal society, we're all on his side, even though we live on their side. And it's just about, like, you know, these kids all know how to use weapons. They all know how to, not to kill people, but to hunt. They all know, you know, how to kill something and gut something and eat it and cook it and forage things. And they're all really fit and strong. And it's just about what our perception of success is as society, and how disconnected that is from the realities of actually surviving as a human again, and the natural world. So yeah, it's a really interesting experiment to kind of think about. His way of living is seen as so extreme, but it's how our species got to be here, and how people judge him for it. So I get very angry about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I haven't seen this film, but I'll look it up, and yeah, the alien will look forward to seeing that film as well.
Excellent.
What about the third place then? What's the third place that you would take our alien friend here visiting Earth?
So the third place is going to get even worse, I'm afraid. So we're taking it from that garden and the garden culture all the way up to modern infrastructure and how that's affecting our wildlife. This is all UK based, but it's probably been replicated around the world. And it's just an average, again, nameless, naming no names, average new 2019, 2020 built housing estate. A modern monoculture of new build houses. Sorry if anyone's got a new build house. On an estate with nothing, with no greenery, with no hedges, with no bits of grass, with no green space nearby, with no imagination in the gardens. All the houses are completely airtight, completely watertight. There's no nooks and crannies for wildlife to even dare to enter. You know, you're not going to have any sparrows nesting in your eaves. You're not going to have any swifts. You're not going to have bats getting into your roof. All of these things that are perceived as negative. You know, there's strips of neat, shiny, plain grass down the middle of the street. If any grass at all, most of them now are just wall-to-wall concrete and brick, up the brick of the houses, and that's it. I went around a new estate last year that was supposed to be built with some wildlife benefits in mind, which had happened. It included swift bricks in some of the designs, that included bat boxes, that included some areas of wildflower meadow. But the areas of wildflower meadow were receiving endless complaints from the new residents, saying it was a mess and it was embarrassing. And under one of the houses that had swift bricks on it, there was a plastic lawn. Plastic lawns should be illegal. Start a campaign, first of all. What are they?
So it sounds like some of these measures are a bit sort of tokenistic. Is that what you're saying? That it's not that they're not doing any of them, but they're just piecemeal, tokenistic kind of holes for swifts.
It's not that it's tokenistic, because they could realistically work. They could. I'm very passionate about the fact that we could welcome more wildlife back in if we change multiple areas of our lives. You know, our food, the way we live, our travel, everything. But creating homes for nature can work, and it can help, especially on a local level. But the attitude's not there, and people aren't ready for it. And it will change. The tide will change, I hope, but people just aren't ready for it yet. So it's a bit depressing, I'm afraid.
So the aliens are concerned about the new build housing estates, and it's telling me that it thinks we should have rules about a minimum amount of green space around any new housing estate.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a reflection of just our entire society. Obviously, there's really important needs for providing housing for people, but it could be done in a much more clever way, and much less resource intensive, and just with a lot more respect to nature. And that could help to heal our relationship with nature a little bit as well.
What about a song or a film that you would play the alien in this housing estate?
Okay, a song. Again, very stereotypical one. Big Yellow Taxi by Joni Mitchell.
Okay, excellent.
We paved paradise and put up a parking lot, or in this case, a monstrous new housing estate. That's a really good song for just kind of what we're doing. What are we doing?
From an alien's perspective, humans are doing these things, and yet we're self-aware of the fact that we're doing them. Collectively, we are aware that we are paving over paradise, and we're doing it anyway. And the alien is finding this very confusing.
I would say we are aware. You and I are aware, and we very much live in a bubble of that awareness. That sounds really obnoxious, doesn't it? We're very good at finding other people that love the same things that we do and getting passionate with them about it. And that is, in our case, the natural world and the effects that we're having on it. A lot of people do not see that. A lot of people, your average member of the community, will take joy out of things that I find alien. So, you know, there's that thought experiment of what would your hell look like if you woke up and you've been sent to hell. What would it look like? Mine would either be the middle of a shopping mall, not naming any again, but any large shopping mall, or walking through duty free in an airport, and it never ending with the sparkly floor, and it stinks of perfume, and everyone's shoving sunglasses in your face.
Never ending duty free at airports. Yeah. I mean,
but people love that. You know, some people, that is a great source of entertainment. Going out shopping all day, buying stuff is entertainment, and we have to accept that. If we're ever going to change hearts and change people's ways of living, we need to accept that people love living like that at the moment, and they need to see that there's an alternative, and that paradise can be a scrubby bit of meadow that you've never paid attention to before.
It's what you say about we're living in a bubble, because people like ourselves are in the environmental sector, and we are chatting amongst ourselves in a kind of an echo chamber, really. And it is really important to remember that we're perhaps in the minority. Someone I was talking to recently, when we were having a conversation at the time last year in 2019 when the Amazon was on fire, and he said to me, "Oh, well, it's all right, we'll just colonize Mars instead." And I think, a lot of people just genuinely, that was a genuine opinion of that person. Yeah. And they don't really understand that that might be possible in the future, but it's more like 100,000 years' time when we'll actually potentially be colonizing Mars on a large scale. But actually, that's only theoretical. In practice, we may well have wiped ourselves out by then anyway.
Yeah.
So the sea level rise, people are going to be drowning in the next 10, 20, 30 years. Will we ever get to 100,000 years' time when we can, in theory, colonize other planets? So that is the challenge that we've got, isn't it? That the environmentalist echo chamber needs to break out and reach people and change people's minds.
Yes,
that are not coming in this way.
Yeah, like I'll be in my social circles, I'll be nicely ridiculed and observed as being a nerd and a geek because I like geeky wildlife. But if you ask anyone on the street, if you go to anyone in the UK, they'll know who David Attenborough is and they'll think he's cool. They'll think, slow motion great white sharks and elephants and giraffes fighting and all that is great. And that stuff, that cool stuff, is still here that we can see on our shores. And it's about changing that attitude to find that as interesting and to care about it as much. Because it's easy to get people to donate for a tiger in a different country. It's very difficult to get them to connect as much with the wildlife on the doorstep because they just don't see it. They just don't know it's there. So.
Yeah, it's great what you're doing. Like I said earlier, with things like the leaf miners and the and all these sort of small fungi and getting kind of all the amazing life cycles and the way that fungi work. All these things are really interesting. It's not just about the big things. We do need to find ways of reaching out to people that aren't already interested in these things.
Yeah.
So you've talked about the song that you would play, the alien in this paved over parking lot from the song, or the paved over housing estates in general. What about a film? Is there a final film that you'd like to show the alien before it goes back to its own planet?
This is the film that got me just riled as a kid. I still loved wildlife at this point, but I remember wishing that I was a main character in this film. And again, it's very cheesy. It is Fern Gully. The story is of a rainforest. I think it's in Australia of all things, because it's definitely Australian. But there are fairies that live in this rainforest. They're really, really badass fairies. They're really cool. And they're very connected with the natural world and working with nature, and they live as this like natural thing. And the next thing you know, a great big industrial corporate logging company comes along and tries to start chopping it down. And this young lad, who's a human, who works for this logging company, you can tell all he cares about is just a young man. He just cares about having fun. He's cool. He's listening to his music. He doesn't really care. And he ends up joining this fairy world and going on this like adventure. And just his whole perception of the natural world changes during the progression of the film, and it just goes to show that anybody can be changed and brought around. I'm really passionate about this. Like, I can get anybody to care about nature if you give me long enough with them. Some people it takes a while. I might not get them to loving spiders, but people will appreciate things.
That concept of change is very interesting for the alien. It's telling me telepathically at the moment, because one of its first observations about humanity was it's using the word neophobic. So the fear of the new, the fear of the unknown, the inability to change one's mind. Yeah. And I'm really glad that you've chosen a film there which demonstrates somebody that can go on a journey from having one mindset to having another mindset. Because ultimately that's how we're going to get out of these climate and ecological crises, is through the majority of people changing their mind. And it's so hard to change your mind, isn't it? And the alien gives me a phrase in the book about how can you actually change your mind and keep your pride? Because a lot of this is about pride, isn't it? I've always had this opinion and I'm not going to change it. And one of the phrases that it gives me in the book is, that's such a good idea, I wish I'd thought of it earlier. Or that's such a good idea, I'm embarrassed I didn't think of it earlier. Or I'm embarrassed I didn't think of it myself. Because it helps you to acknowledge that you're changing your mind, and also being honest about the fact that, I wish I'd thought of it earlier. Because then you own the change.
Yes.
We need to, I think, have more conversations and raise awareness of more films like Fern Gully, which give a blueprint for the fact that you can change and you can keep your pride and change at the same time.
Yeah. And on top of it all, it's also got Robin Williams in it, who's obviously the late and great, brilliant, and he plays a bat. What more could you want?
Oh, he's just the voice for the bat. Okay, yeah, great. Excellent. Okay, so we've taken the alien to 3 places, and have you got any kind of final thoughts about anything that kind of wrap the whole kind of journey together, the 3 places together? Any kind of
I'd just say it's kind of only half a journey that for me. We only know what's happening now at the present, and it's hard to tell if we're in a point of change. And I'd like to think that maybe it's starting to tip. We've seen this really big surge in attitude change towards particularly the climate crisis and the lack of action about it. But the biodiversity crisis is getting more recognition in the media and people talking about it. And I just hope that, you know, we mentioned at the moment we're on lockdown because of coronavirus. We've seen an upsurge in interest in people because they are literally confined to a very small local space, noticing things they've never seen before. And hopefully just little things like that will get people to connect with nature, see things they've not seen before, learn new species, watch stuff and get joy out of it, fascination out of it, and then be, you know, motivated to do something. So we'll see. This is a TBC, to be continued.
Yeah, great. So I see you've got your alien head in the background there. So you're taking part in Alien Actions. So thank you very much. So for those that don't know, Alien Actions is kind of the practical application of Alien Places. So I'm aware that the conversations we've been having about Alien Places have been almost kind of theoretical, almost philosophical, but actually we want to convert that now into practical, positive environmental action that the participants of Alien Places take part in, and then, you know, pass the alien head on to someone else, or take a selfie with it on social media and tag various people that they think might also like to take part in Alien Actions. And this is kind of an environmental action that they think that an alien would do. So something that's perhaps so obvious to a species from another planet that, you know, of course an alien would be recycling, or of course an alien would be, in the recent example, drilling a hole in their fence to allow hedgehogs to go from one back garden to another. So, you know, so have you thought about kind of a particular action that you think might be obvious to an alien species that would be good for our environment that you have done or would like to do yourself?
So I have a big philosophical experiment going on in my head quite a bit, and we have a lovely long list in the world of actions that we can take to help wildlife and to benefit biodiversity. But the main thing that needs to happen before, you know, if there's only a small amount of us doing that, it's not going to add up to enough. So the main thing that needs to happen is an attitude change. And people en masse, in huge numbers, need to be reconnected to nature. So taking the time to observe, watch, learn about wildlife, question it. You don't have to be an expert, but it's just that getting that bit of understanding of how the ecosystem around you is working, you know, who are the characters, what's there, what's going on. And just taking the time to spread that information and talk to people about it, and not take mick out people who are into it. And communicating about wildlife. It sounds like it's not really an action, but it is, because telling people about it can be that first step.
That's great. You know, so your positive environmental action is to continue to communicate about wildlife and nature and biodiversity. And, you know, that's a huge amount of action that you're doing. You know, anyone that's seen your Instagram feed will see the amount of hours that you're putting into your story. And, you know, I thank you from me personally for teaching me about leaf miners, because I didn't know about leaf miners before I watched your Instagram stories. So, so that's a great positive environmental action that you're doing. Educating people within the environmental sector like myself, but also people outside the environmental sector. If only we can get more of them to watch your Instagram stories.
Brilliant, thank you. Nice to meet you and Alien.
Yeah, so the alien is very happy with your 3 places, and thank you for the positive environmental action that you're doing as part of Alien Actions as well. So where can people find you on social media?
So just on Instagram and Twitter, just as Lucy Lapwing.
Yeah, great, Lucy Lapwing. Great, okay, well, thank you from the Alien and me to Lucy Lapwing for sharing with us your 3 alien places.
Thank you.